Welcome to the Unit Economics Podcast. I'm Josh Stavinsky. On today's episode, I sit down with Dan Cassaro, Dan Christofferson, and Meg Yahashi, the team behind Weast Coast Games, a modern board game studio designing beautifully crafted tabletop games. Weast Coast is an offshoot of Young Jerks, the branding and packaging studio they've been building for over a decade, and in this conversation, we get into how a lunchtime prototype turned into an actual board game business. We talk about designing gameplay, manufacturing physical products, and why they chose to lead with a high-cost, component-heavy game instead of playing it safe. This was a fascinating look into balancing craft and creative ambition with the economic constraints of making physical products. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Dan, and Meg, thank you all so much for taking the time to do this today. If you all wouldn't mind just providing a brief background on yourselves, that would be great.
Perfect. I can start. My name's Meg. I am the Director of Operations at Young Jerks and co-founder, COO at Weast Coast. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York.
And I am one of two Dans. I'm one of the founders of Young Jerks and of Weast Coast. I'm creative director at Young Jerks, and my official role at Weast Coast, we should probably decide on that. Game designer, creative head, I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Game guy.
Game guy?
Game guy. Love it.
Official title. And I'm Dan Christofferson, a partner at Young Jerks and also founder at Weast Coast.
Awesome. Thank you. Talk to me a little bit about the formation of Young Jerks. I'd like to just set the stage and give listeners some context on the type of work that you're still doing, right? It's not like you've completely departed from doing your traditional design work, but I do want to frame maybe how big a jump this was into developing board games.
Yeah, I can give a little background on the sort of Young Jerks part of the story. Dan and I both come from a design and illustration background. We both went to school for graphic design and operated sort of as freelance illustrators, designers, brand designers in various capacities with our own solo practices before joining together and like officially starting Young Jerks, which was basically just Dan and I together for the first couple of years until Meg came on board. And in the past 10 years, we've scaled to become, a full branding studio with a number of people that work there, thanks to Meg's help. And since we've started Weast Coast, we've continued to operate Young Jerks in the same way. In fact, maybe even have grown a little bit since we started Weast Coast. But that's also given us the opportunity to spend time on this other thing that we're building together.
And what are some example projects that you've worked on as part of Young Jerks?
So Young Jerks is a brand and packaging studio. So we do branding for different companies, early, mid-stage, mostly food and beverage companies. So we like to say that most of the stuff we work on is like treats. So it's like chocolate, cheese, beer, yummy sodas, that kind of stuff, like anything that you would use as a little treat. And we've also done packaging for toys, restaurants, things like that. But yeah, it's usually food and beverage with a focus on the packaging design for them.
Talk to me a bit about the venture into game making. What made you interested in sort of at least just exploring that space?
Yeah, I would call all of us kind of casual gamers. Like I grew up playing card and board games with my family after dinner and things like that. And then when I joined the guys, we didn't, we had no plans to ever launch a game company together. But Dan Cassaro made this game. He hand drew a bunch of tiles and then started bringing it into the office, and we would play at lunch just with Dan's hand-drawn set. And I immediately got obsessed with it. It's such a good game. It's very simple but very strategic. And so we were playing it every day. During the pandemic, Dan actually made me my own set also, and we would play long distance, like sending photos back and forth, like playing chess long distance. So in 2021, I think I just really saw the potential for it to grow and for other people to want to play it. One of the best and worst things about working with creatives is that they have a hard time championing their own work, I think, and are too humble to say this is something amazing that we should share with the world. And so I get to be the person at Young Jerks and also now at Weast Coast that says this is really phenomenal. This is really special. This game mechanic also combined with how incredibly talented the guys are as designers. I think I just saw an opportunity to distribute it more widely and make it something that was available for everybody.
Yeah, I think Meg saw something in it that, at least for Dan and I originally, because we used to share a studio space with other people that weren't in Young Jerks. It was just a bunch of people in the pencil factory in Greenpoint. And us building these games, these little card games, and eventually the Snakes game was almost just like a creative exercise. Like, be like, I have an idea for this Wizards card game or whatever the thing's going to be. Here's a bunch of blank cards. At lunchtime, everyone sits down and draws one of the cards or something. So it was this like collaborative, fun, communal thing that we did together. And I think Meg had maybe a little bit of insight into, something else that it could become.
I think it's easy for designers, especially me or Dan and I, to be a little short-sighted. We could get a little lost or be satisfied really quickly with just a prototype or just a quick idea getting out of our head, and we'd be like, yay, it looks cool, or we printed it and it's great. And I think luckily Meg, had a lot of experience with production and had a lot of experience with longer timelines and just seeing things all the way through, especially at Young Jerks, was building systems and things. And so she sat us down and was like, listen, we could do this. We can do this. I think we can do this.
I know you guys are excited about the next shiny thing that's coming up, but let's just focus on this shiny thing for a second.
Also, just really quickly, one of the reasons that Young Jerks worked too, she was one of our first hires, and she was like, okay, all these things are cool. Let's turn it into a, functioning studio that can grow. And we saw potential there. And so we trusted her really quickly with Weast Coast too, that it could become something beyond lunchtime games.
So you're bought in. What are the next steps? I know that you initially launched using Kickstarter, but what did, I guess, the immediate aftermath of deciding we're actually going to do this look like?
I was scared from the moment that we decided to do it up until the Kickstarter, just scared for, a year and a half straight.
Still scared. We still have to convince Dan that our next game is worth doing. Like, we'll have everything ready to launch. We've bought everything, and Dan is still like, what if it's not good? And we have to be like, it's good. Remember, we've been talking about it for 2 years. Anyway, immediate aftermath of our decision, we did everything a little bit backwards. So we actually did a ton of production work before we launched our Kickstarter. We kind of used Kickstarter almost as a proving ground afterwards, or as a sales tool more than I think what it traditionally is used for, which is raising funding to produce something. We had gotten connected with an independent consultant who we were working with on another Young Jerks project to help us get connected to a factory and then start, putting things in die lines, that sort of thing. So fortunately, the guys are super well versed in prepping files, and we had all of our components figured out and everything. So yeah, we worked originally with this consultant who found a factory that would be a good fit for us that he knew, started helping us put together die lines, figuring out how things should be packed. I had a little bit of freight shipping experience, so we weren't too scared to manufacture overseas. It is still scary, freight shipping anything at any time, but we just started doing that, and then we kind of moved pretty slowly through that. It took us about a year from when we, this was summer 2021, we decided we want to try and make this a real product. And then it wasn't until maybe halfway through 2022 where we had artwork files ready to submit and to place our first order.
So I know that the components for Snakes in particular were very expensive relative to other games that you've made since. Can you all speak a bit to how you weighed that decision? My guess is many people in this situation would likely start with a cheaper game to produce, but that's not what you did. And so I'm really curious how you decided to create this one first. And for listeners who aren't familiar, there are, I believe, 90 really detailed, very specific high quality tiles as part of the game. And it's not a small box, right? This is sort of an irregular, large, maybe vintage looking board game box. So yeah, talk to me a bit about what that process was like and how you came to that decision.
We didn't know what we didn't know, which I think was a blessing because we would have gotten really scared and probably not done it if we had known more. But the components that we had were the original components that Dan came up with when we were playing at lunch, and the guys have really great taste. And so they were like, let's make this as beautiful and as appealing as possible to hold in your hand. We really want it to feel special and like something that you're going to keep for a really long time. I think all of us are just like personally attracted to things like that, products like that. So we just decided to make it, something that we really wanted to make and keep.
Yeah, we definitely had the blessing of being naive, because if you laid it all out on paper, it doesn't make sense. If you had gave us all the information up front, we'd be like, oh, we probably shouldn't do this. But I think the whole, value proposition for like creating a beautiful board game is that it is like you touch it and you hold it and you keep it forever and you're enjoying it in this physical space and all of the things. So all of the components that, we wanted to make and how we wanted those components to look, we're all kind of in service to that. It was like following that to the logical conclusion of like, if this is going to be a thing that you'll want to keep forever, and that when you're a grandparent, it'll still be in your basement and your grandchildren will find it or something like that. What do we want it to look like? And so with that as sort of our North Star, we just kind of stuck to that.
Yeah, we had, like saved up emotional energy. We had saved up some finances for Young Jerks to sort of like, fund it along with the Kickstarter. So even though we were naive, we were ready to do something like that. And, you can tell by the next 2 games that we've launched and the one coming out next that they're card games. So we're like responding to that whiplash, from small box card games. But it probably is good. It's funny. We did PAX U for our 3rd year, even just attending, and everyone's like, whoa, first game is this like really expensive, component rich. And we're like, yeah, we understand that now. Correct. Yeah. Probably actually really smart for us to go through really wild years of like shipping and tariffs and, production and understanding and getting relationships with factories in a really heavy component game, and then go backwards, because now everything feels like
Everything's easier after that.
So much easier. Yeah.
There's also, I think, a little bit of confidence that we showed by like entering this market with something that was so fully realized. Like we didn't dip our toes into this. We dove in head first. So when we showed up in this space, people were like, oh, they took notice of that. And I think maybe that helped garner a little bit more attention than we would have if we put out a tiny little card game for our first thing.
How did you determine where to set the price point initially? Were you just trying to break even? What went into the pricing decision?
We originally actually set our margins based on kind of what we're used to doing at Young Jerks. So, aiming for like a 50% profit margin, which is actually too low for like a product, which we've learned since then.
Can you explain why that is?
I think it's industry standard, but also, maybe just us not knowing where we could cut costs and kind of like accepting the very first price that we were given for the very first run, and just not knowing how much more cost effective we could be if we worked with a different partner or if we used different materials, things like that. So I think we set the price based on trying to hit a 50% profit margin in order to just make some money so that we could fulfill it and then potentially make another game after that. And also wanting it to feel like something that was a little bit special that you would get for yourself, or a nice gift for somebody. Thinking about like, what budget do we usually try and hit for like, oh, I really care about this person, I want to get them something special for Christmas or the holidays, and just basing it off of that. So kind of an educated guess, I would say. Semi-educated.
Makes sense. So you launch on Kickstarter. It's a massive success. You're grossly oversubscribed. The reaction in the market is really positive. I have played your games. I'm a big fan, and I would be polite, but I'm not just saying that. Like, I am a big fan, and I think the way you described them earlier, Meg, is dead on, where they're simple to pick up, but they're more complex than I think meets the eye, and there's quite a bit of strategy to them, and I was genuinely impressed by the gameplay. And I'm wondering how you think about designing gameplay in general. I don't want to get too long-winded with this question, but when you're developing a game, how do you think about gameplay? How do you think about when it's time to greenlight something? Like, what does that process look like? How do you know something's ready for production? And in what ways is there any tension, if at all, between the art and the craft and the sort of economic constraints, let's say, when you're actually developing a physical product? I know that's like several questions in one, but I think this is such a fascinating part of the story and about like the product development. So I'd love to just dive in as much as we can here.
Yeah, I can talk about the game part of it, and then maybe Dan, you can talk about the art and design and how the mechanics get married to the gameplay.
Yeah.
I think that's a thing that we have been figuring out, like what the right balance is of like strategic depth to a game versus what the learning curve is. You know, you always think about like the ratio of what the rule set is of a game to how deep the gameplay can go. You know, it's not hard to make a simple game with 2 rules that doesn't have a lot of strategy to it. You know what I mean? They can just be old maid or something like that. And it's also, in some level, if you understand game design, not hard to make an extremely complicated game with a million different rules and edge cases that also has a lot of strategic depth to it. So the dream scenario is that we can balance these things out a little bit, where it's easy to pick up, to understand, but the payoff you get from like layers of strategic depth or whatever, these sort of like metas that develop inside of the game that show up when you play it more and more, there's just sort of a better ratio of those things. And I think that we've gone back and forth on some of our games where, you know, Snakes was kind of rules light. Our second game, Desperate Oasis, was a little bit more rules heavy. And then Fruit Boss is a lot easier. I think our newest card game is a lot easier to sort of pick up. So I think we're playing around with all of those things. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to consider.
Meg, maybe before art, you could talk a little bit about like playability. And once I feel like you have a better handle of like, all right, this is playable. The playability has been tested over and over. We know that it's good. And then we apply art to it.
Yeah, I feel like Dan Cassaro didn't give himself enough credit because he comes to us often with games like sort of almost fully formed. Like last year, I think like 20 times every week, he was like, here's a new game. Over Christmas, actually, he texted me rules to a new game that I haven't even read yet because he just does it all the time.
It's really good, Meg. You should play it. It's a good one.
I'm excited to play it. Yeah, so our process, I would say, is usually Dan has just tapped into this incredible creativity for gameplay and development, and then we get to play test it. And I would say, our main metric for deciding to launch something is just how fun we think it is and how much we want to play it over and over. My husband also loves games, and so we try and take what Dan brings us and see if we want to play it every day. We play a game at like breakfast and lunch, so if it starts making its way into our daily rotation, I feel like that's a really good sign. And yeah, because we have so many ideas for things to launch, it's kind of fun to see like what sticks and what we just naturally feel drawn to. We had another game last year, I think, that we were really close to launching, that we, got pretty far down the road on production on. And then we just as a team found ourselves not wanting to play it and kind of dreading play testing it. And so we had to stop ourselves and say like, okay, if we're already kind of sick of it and we don't feel that excited about it, then this isn't something that we should put our resources behind launching. So a lot of it is, I would say, in intuition from that end, but also economically, yeah, what we have now that we're getting a few years in, what we have the cash flow for and what we can afford to make.
Yeah, quickly before we get into art, is there any broader market research done? Is it just Meg? Is it just you and your husband playing, or do you sample the games with any sort of like third party as well?
Oh, that's a good question. We usually do like group play testing, like send it to trusted family and friends. So especially for that second game that I mentioned and the ones coming out, once we get far enough along in the process where we feel really excited about it, we'll send probably 10 copies out to people that we really trust and value their opinion and have them tested a few times, give us some feedback on if they like it, if they want to keep playing, that kind of thing.
Meg and Dan and I, and specifically Meg and Dan, will play and play and play art and theme agnostic. Like they'll just play test, shitty, whatever scribbled on cards and try and break the rules and play and sort of fix all that stuff until it feels really solid. And then Dan and I will sort of be like, all right, let's apply a theme to it. We'll have art ideas and then art gets applied. Typically, we'll have a pretty clear idea of art. We'll work it up and then print prototype sets and then send those out with a pretty clear idea of rules. The art is almost done, and then we'll do more formal play testing with those.
There's a lot of times too where like, the initial rule set or sort of the basic core loop of the game will be theme agnostic. And then Dan and I will sit down and go into like creative direction mode and be like, what if the vibe is this? What if we make it feel like this weird artifacts that you found in grandpa's basement? It looks like he got it from when he was at the wars. You know what I mean? Whatever the story is that we're trying, we'll come up with that. And then that will get inserted into the gameplay. And a lot of times that will inform like new rules or new mechanics that go into the game. So there's a bit of back and forth, but I think, talking about the art and design, when Dan and I go into like our little huddle about what this thing could feel like or what the vibe of it could be, we're not just picturing like the game components or the packaging. We're thinking about like how it's going to get marketed, what the video we're going to shoot for it is, if we're going to write a theme song for it, if there's, like all of these different parts of it, because I think that's part of the fun for all of us, is that we get to do this like market rollout for our games and kind of hype it up in that way too.
That idea too of being able to apply a theme to a game that feels ready is such a fun thing, because we often then get to sit down and be like, what feels cool? Like sharks or dungeons or, and it feels like the games we played when we were kids, like, should we be knights or should we be this? Or, it's such a wide range of themes. And often we get to think through these really specific tropes around fantasy, or we get to think about survival games or things that, have really deep themes that are like full of all this sort of stuff. Or we can just pull from like batches of illustration, things that we're just really excited about. Or, there's a hint of a concept where it feels like it needs to have fish somehow because there's like a depth to the game, or there's layers of depth and fish feels right, but we have been designing and illustrating for so long that all of it feels possible and all of it feels fun. So we really do get to just like enjoy those ideas.
Yeah, that's amazing. Have there been any instances in which, for whatever reason, you had to scrap a theme because it was in conflict with something about gameplay, something about mechanics, theme or art for that matter? Or has it all just sort of clicked?
Well, I'll talk about Wizards, and you can scrap this part a little bit if you want. But we built one of our first games, and probably the thing that got me into Weast Coast is I've never really been much of a games player. In fact, maybe even now, often I have to get talked into playing games. I love Weast Coast, and I love making toys, and I love making games. As a graphic design project, there's nothing funner than making games. It has everything we want. But strategically, I don't know if my brain necessarily works. Every time Dan comes with a game, I'm like, I don't understand how his brain came up with it. It's wild to me, it's so much fun to play and figure it out, but I don't get it. When Wizards, which was the first game that he pitched, it was blank cards and he was just drawing like, a water wizard, a fire wizard, and a earth wizard, and you cast spells around in this circle. And it was the first time that I looked at a game that was just scribbled on cards, and I was like, oh, right. Every game started like this, and we were like bending the rules as we were playing or inventing these things. And I was like, oh, what if the spells we cast did this? And I felt like this kind of magic happening, and I was a little bit hooked. It was such a simple game, which my brain really loved. There wasn't a ton of strategy, which Dan and Meg didn't love. And, it maybe will fail in the market, who knows, but I loved it so much that I just keep redesigning it over and over. And I'm like, what about this, guys? And the first week they're like, we love it, let's do it. And then a week later, they're like, wait, we don't love it. So like, I've redesigned it like 3 or 4 times. This is the German toy version of Wizards. So it's like, little wooden actual toy wizards that I built and photographed and gave them all their own little powers. And the cards all have little wild wizards, and the fire wizards have the whole thing. So we built a whole previous version that felt like dark arcane wizards that were like too scary. And in the end, we were like forcing an art style on a game that wasn't ready just because we were loving all these different art styles. And we've needed to step back and rebuild the game, but we're forcing it into a theme that we really love, and it's just not compatible. So we're holding on to this idea and kind of saving the theme for this game that we love, but in the meantime, we're moving on with all of these other games. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's definitely a sticking point and probably helping us design better games as we learn from it,
Not only am I not going to scrap that, I'm going to try to use that in as much promotional material as I possibly can. I really hope you all release Wizards. It sounds
one day.
Some version of it.
This is Dan's way of forcing everybody to tell us to release it.
Right.
He's like, now
Yeah.
we're going to get all this feedback to release
Now
it.
you have to.
Now you have to do it. Now you're on the hook. If you all don't want that out there, I'm happy to edit that out in post. But
No,
I
it's totally.
think it's
No.
fascinating.
We also have written, there's secret codes in all of our games where the first one says WC1 hidden on it. The second one that we release says WC3. The next one says WC4. So people that are kind of sharp and Weast Coast super fans have sent us emails or DMs that have been like, hey, where's WC2? Where's WC2? Is there a secret WC2 that I don't know about? So there's already rumblings among the community about the secret wizard game.
Yeah, that's awesome. So in doing research, I was not really able to find any other examples of design firms that have branched out into game making to the extent that you all have. Maybe I've missed something, but
Probably not.
that's my understanding. And I guess I'm curious who you all draw inspiration from, be it other game makers, if there are particular board games that you find really compelling that you draw inspiration from, or anybody else, anything else more broadly, any other businesses that have sort of maybe branched out in a loosely similar way.
That's a good question. I don't know.
It's a really good question.
I feel like, Meg, you've always been good at sort of finding mentor circles or staying connected with whatever, I don't know, ops people in and around circles. I don't know if any of that is inspirational, but
Yeah, I guess philosophically, there's this business community called the Small Giants community, and they are a mentor company. And I feel really inspired just in the way that we build our business. We've been really fortunate to be able to be our own investors from Young Jerks to Weast Coast. And so that's let us, one, have the flexibility to keep our day jobs and get to also build this together and work together in all aspects of it. And also to be able to grow slowly and intentionally and without the pressure of maybe outside funding. I think a typical path would be for us to maybe set up a company and fundraise or something like that. That's a lot of startups follow that path. And we've been able to fund it ourselves and so have a lot of creative control and also control over the trajectory of where we're going. So I feel really inspired by businesses that are really values-led, who place a lot of emphasis on making something beautiful and making it really well, rather than just trying to put out something really quickly or put out something purely for the sales benefit of it. And I think that's something that we all share. And so less industry specific, but I think any type of small company that really could be bigger if their only goal was to grow really quickly and grow into a large company, but are kind of choosing to stay a little bit small, go a little bit more slowly, build something that they're really proud of.
Yeah, Young Jerks is almost 10 years old now, or is 10 years old. And the first 5 or 6 years, we just kept seeing whatever, brave founders scrap together their money and go I want to make a beer. Our friends started this thing called Sunday Beer, and it was just a couple of guys that were it's this light beer. We're going to start it. It's sort of the beer that our grandpa gave us when we were probably too young to drink a beer. And it was really cool to watch them build something small, and was probably really hard in the beginning to get distribution and all that sort of stuff. And we helped a lot of small brands build themselves into something big. And I think all along we were just watching how they would do it and being great graphic design is going to help, helps them a lot. Great marketing, great ideas. We have all of those and, can apply it to one day our silly toys and games. And this year feels also really huge for Weast Coast. We've had great sales. We have 3 games. We have a few more coming. And it feels like a really pivotal year where we're applying all the lessons we've learned, and feels like a really great turning point, which is exciting.
Yeah, I love both of those answers. I was going through the transcripts from every single episode I've recorded so far, and there's this through line where I've talked to a number of founders now who have prioritized the craft, the physical product, and not sacrificed it at the expense of growing for the sake of growth. And I don't know if I've just naturally selected for those types of products and those types of companies, because those are the types of companies that I also find inspirational. But yeah, I don't know. That's just like very personally satisfying to me. And on the topic of lessons learned, I would love to know if there have been any lessons that you've taken from game development as Weast Coast and then applied back to a client side project for Young Jerks. Does anything come to mind?
I think across the board, what we've learned a little bit by putting our own stuff out there with our own voice, completely unfiltered, and kind of doing like, what does Dan and Meg think is funny? What do I think is funny? What do I think is interesting to me? Is that we have gotten a lot of confirmation that our sense of humor, even if it doesn't make sense sometimes, even if we don't over explain it to people, that people really respond to that. There's like a confidence that people feel. There is this aspirational thing about like, these guys are having fun. I can tell they're having fun and I want to be part of that. Like all of that stuff is inviting people into the fold in this, I think, maybe non-traditional way. Like we're not yelling at people that this is the best thing ever. This is the smartest thing ever. This is the fanciest thing ever. We're just showing them like, we're having fun doing this. Do you want to come over here and have fun? And it's really worked out for us. And I think there's probably a lot of lessons in that for other consumer products or whatever, and how they are going to put themselves out in the world too.
If another design firm came to you all and asked you for one specific piece of advice because they were trying to transition into physical product manufacturing, what's one piece of advice you would give them?
I think something I've learned throughout this process is how much we can trust ourselves to learn the skills that we don't have, and then also connect with people who have skills and have them teach us, and then be able to make confident decisions based on kind of taking ownership over the components. Like we talked earlier about our first run of snakes, we worked with somebody, and then throughout that process, there were so many things that we were like, oh, we can just do that ourselves. And it's a combination, obviously, of working really hard and having years of experience in certain areas, but something like creating die lines, like I think it just clicked for Dan Christofferson. One day, Dan was like, oh, I know how to make a die line and I can print this out and I can build us a prototype. And so being able to take ownership over the components and being able to do something yourself and do a really scrappy version of it yourself, I would say that's something I wish that we had started doing earlier, and that I'm really grateful that we do now.
I have a really direct sort of like one-to-one thing I learned. I work with a lot of new clients and new biz at Young Jerks, and I have crazy empathy for clients who are trying to get something produced. They come to us and they're like, I'm trying, I'm working on getting something manufactured, and I'm like, tell me about it. Tell me about it. I've been working on this thing for a year, and we have so much in common, mostly through Weast Coast, and I can empathize with them. We share, stories about factories. We share contacts, and it's such a great connection with a founder who's really trying to get something done, and we are in the same boat. So the advice I would also give is some of the things I've learned specifically around timelines, or, like with manufacturing specifically, you're already a year behind. Meg was really helpful in that, where we were like, as designers, we were like, let's get it and let's sell it in the summer. And she's like, nope, we got to think one year ahead. And Dan and I were like toddlers about it. And we were like, no way, that we, like, we want it now. So we had to reset a lot of expectations around that sort of stuff. But now I feel like we're in a good rhythm with all of that. And it's made us, I think, better designers and a better firm with our CPG clients, understanding their pain points, and then just more patient with our manufacturing and everything with our games.
Dan Cassaro, anything you want to add?
I would just say, if you're thinking about doing the Domino's thing, don't do Domino's thing, because they're all wet and they're heavy and they're really expensive to ship. And then there's so many of them, and sometimes they stick together, and you got to put silica gel in there too. Yeah.
Great lessons all around. I think we have time for one more question. Where do you all see Weast Coast Games 3 to 5 years from now? Is it a continuation of slow, deliberate game making do you have any desire to branch out into other toys, any other physical products? Where do you see things going?
Probably the hardest question that you could ask us. I don't think we have any real concrete plans for 3 to 5 years from now. We've been thinking kind of a year at a time. So 3 to 5 years, I hope that we're still making games that we're really proud of. I think just continuing on the route that we're on. We have a couple exciting opportunities coming later this year for us to potentially be in some wider retail opportunities. So we're excited for that and gonna see how that goes.
Yeah, I think there's different types of success, and I think that like we or ways to measure it or whatever, and I think that we have been really happy with the amount of games that we've been able to sell and the people that we've been able to connect with. But there's a lot more people that I think would be interested in, playing our games or would really enjoy them. So I think, we're excited about the opportunity to like share them with more people and stuff like that. It feels like we still have like a lot more people that I think we could share Snakes of Wrath with. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, we luckily have Young Jerks, incredible designers at Young Jerks that we tap into to help build our games. And they are so talented and they've helped us, but we don't have enough resources to design all the games that Dan designs. So we're going to have to scale. So my goal would be to get Dan Cassaro, a little games designer buddy, Meg, a little ops buddy, and myself, like a little marketing buddy, just so we could sort of really make all these games. Like there are so many, in fact, that will look up something and be like, oh, this game was actually really fun and we already sort of designed it. Man, I would love to do it. Or Dan was here a couple weeks ago and we started grieving a part of a game that we'll never be able to do. And it's like an expansion pack of a game we'll absolutely release, but it was one expansion pack that we're like, oh, and we were just grieving it. And I was like, man, I don't want to grieve this thing. I want to actually do it. But it was just like one thing we might never be able to do. And it felt really weird to do that, even though the game isn't even released, So I think that growth will be really exciting just because, it's one of those things that just never really feels like a job, making games and stuff. So that would be really fun to see all of us have help in our roles.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much for the time. I learned so much. If you want to share with listeners where they can pick up your games, please feel free to do so.
We sell primarily on our website, which is weastcoast.games, and we have a number of independent retailers. There's a map on our site, but you can find us in a lot of indie stores and online.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you can stay up to date with the latest episodes. Thanks for listening.